New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Welcome to I Know You Didn't Ask. I'm your host, Megan O'Donnell, and there is nothing more Megan coded than telling my loyal listeners to watch a documentary in advance of an episode and consistently getting the name wrong of the documentary every single time that I've mentioned it, especially in this last Monday's episode. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to that. But I said it wrong like 4 different times, and I could have gone back and re-recorded and been more diligent, but I feel like you guys knew what documentary I was talking about, right? So if you've clicked the episode, you know we're here to talk about the absolutely bone-chilling story that played out in Netflix unknown number, The High School Catfish. This documentary came out back in August, and it was examining a true crime case that unpacked the real-life cyberbullying case that rocked the small community of Beale City, Michigan. This episode will be one big spoiler as to who that catfish is, so this is a warning. Warning. Turn this off if you don't want to hear it. If you planned on watching the documentary and wanted to be surprised, but I mean, I'm gonna I artfully produced this episode in a way that, the maybe first 24 minutes won't tell you who the catfish is, but safe to say you will find out. So if you haven't watched the documentary on Netflix, go back and watch it. Back in October of 2020, a 13-year-old girl, Lauren Licari, and her boyfriend, Owen McKinney, began receiving these very suspicious texts from an unknown number. After a break, the messages resumed in September of 2021, devolving into a daily barrage of threats and vile insults over the next 15 months. So, this had to be an inside job because some of the messages contained very personal information that only someone close to Lauren or Owen could have known. So, that's when concerned parents and school officials ended up turning to law enforcement to help, which sparked a community wide search to try and find out who the hell this cyberbully truly is. So let's talk a little bit about the players here. We have Lauren Licari. We are talking about a sweet 7th grader who is literally 13 years old. She was born in 2007, which feels illegal. It makes me feel incredibly old. She's a cute, blonde, middle school girl. She was quiet, shy, a little bit of a tomboy, and she was an athlete in school, playing on both the basketball and softball teams. This is a very go sports kind of episode. Lauren was very reserved. She never really showed aggressive emotion in either a positive or negative way. She really only spoke about sports and things that kind of weren't really important. She had friends, but not a ton, and she didn't really seem to have like a main girl bestie. Her boyfriend at the time was Owen, who described her as pretty athletic and super kind. He said she stood out amongst the other basic bitches in the 7th grade. They were kind of considered like the golden couple, which always puts a target on your back. I mean, I was never in a golden couple. I was only dating gay kids. Someone should have told me. But you're always kind of having a resentment towards like the cool, popular kids who are good at sports and handsome and attractive and also like are in love. So they were very much the it couple of the school. And Lauren's boyfriend, Owen, also, grew up in Beale City, Michigan as well. They have known each other since they were little kids. Their school was so small, they actually had pre-K through 12th grade in one building with approximately 50 kids per grade, which means there's about 650 kids in the entire district, which is crazy. My graduating class from a high school on Long Island was probably about 600 people for my grade. So a school of 650 people from K through 12, everybody knows everybody. The entire area and district was very insular and everybody was in everybody's business. So Owen and Lauren started dating, like I mentioned, back in 7th grade, and both of their parents kind of approved of their children dating. They both enjoyed playing sports together and they would be on travel teams where all their families would go together. They would hang out at bonfires. It was very like PG, possibly a PG-13. I don't know. I'm not putting that onto children, but it was not like, Euphoria High where these kids were going and like doing crazy, sexy things. Owen himself, as I mentioned, was also an athlete. He's like your classic middle school boy. There's like literally nothing to write home about with him. Sweet kid who came from parents, Dave and Jill McKenney, who were, kind of like your everyday nice normal parents. They obviously became deeply invested in trying to find out who was harassing their son and Lauren. His parents, Dave and Jill, also grew up in Beale City. They also started dating in 7th grade. Dave played baseball and Jill was a cheerleader, classic love story. And they were kind of an established family in the area. The dad was very involved in the community. The dad coached the sports teams and had a good job locally. The mom was a stay-at-home mom, but also was, a volunteer at local churches. So they were very much like a perfect couple on paper. Everything was great. So there was a bit of parallels between Jill and Dave's relationship and Lauren and Owen's relationship, but Jill didn't put much pressure on their relationship. She just thought they were like kids, dating and growing up and being in middle school like normal people do. But we'll kind of find out throughout this episode about how Kendra very much was putting a lot of weight into this relationship. It's like, girl, they're like 13 years old. Like, this is not the end all be all for your daughter. So at this point, Jill and her husband Dave end up kind of teaming up with Lauren's parents, Kendra and Sean, to kind of investigate this situation. So now we get to Lauren's parents. We have Sean and Kendra Licari. So Sean himself was actually also from Beale City, Michigan. He was also a fellow lifer. He was a super devoted father, and he also was very involved in Lauren's sports as well as, going hiking and doing outdoor activities. Sean and Kendra actually met at Central Michigan University, and they ended up moving to Beale City together. But Kendra didn't grow up in Beale City. She grew up about 2 hours outside of Detroit. And when I was doing this research, I learned a new word. New word alert. It's called exurb, which is basically an exurb are areas located beyond traditional suburbs, but still economically and socially connected to the big city. So it's basically like the sticks, I think. It's like real out in the middle of nowhere. You could still go to the main city, for work if you need to, but it's like beyond suburbs. So we learn something new every day here at I Know You Didn't Ask. So Kendra kind of had the modern day supermom vibe. She had it all together. She was very much the breadwinner of their family. She worked in IT at various banks and then also worked in HR at some universities locally. Sean was working at a local body shop, and his coworkers would always joke that Kendra was very much so his sugar mama. Yikes. She was very much the HBIC of the house. She paid the bills, she planned the vacations, she monitored what was going on in Lauren's life, and she just kind of ran shit. And so while Lauren was very much on the quieter, more shy side, Kendra was very much like the outgoing, cool mom. Like, it's giving Regina George's mom. Friends of Lauren even mentioned that Kendra very much was like always trying to be, seen by the friends and make people laugh. And they would film her crossing her eyes, dancing to Sir Mix-a-Lot, cartwheeling down a hotel hallway on a tournament weekend. Like, girl, you're not like a 12-year-old like the rest of them. Just be a mom. I'm so glad I didn't have a mom who was like desperately trying to like be hot or seen. Like, she just was like being a mom. And poor Lauren was probably like deeply embarrassed by her mom, because nobody likes when their mom is like desperate for attention, and like attention of like 11, 12, 13-year-old kids. Like, it's pretty pathetic. So now we kind of know the players, we know their families, but we have to talk about what happened here. So in October 2020, Lauren and Owen end up receiving all of these suspicious text messages from these unknown numbers. Many, many, many unknown numbers. There'd be a new burner number every few days, which really kind of kept them on their toes. So over time, the messages grew even more threatening, ranging from insults about Lauren's body to like incredibly sexual comments. And at one point, there were even urges for Lauren to kill herself. So the first message that she ever received said, "Hi, Lauren. Owen is breaking up with you, period." And then subsequent texts that day said he no longer likes you and hasn't liked you for a while. It's obvious he wants me. And so at that point, of course, it sparked some red flags. Everyone's like, what's going on? What's going on? And then it died down. And then about a year later, the texting began again. And at this point, they were in 8th grade now. And Lauren and Owen were both getting lots and lots and lots of new messages, sometimes to a point where it was 30 to 40 to 50 messages a day. And some of the messages were saying, it's obvious he wants me. His attention is constantly on me. Not sure what he told you, but he's coming to the Halloween party and we are both DTF. Down to fuck. And so this Halloween party kind of became like a turning point in this entire situation because a girl named Chloe Wilson in town, again, who was a daughter of a lifer, Tammy. Tammy always would host an annual Halloween party where everybody in the neighborhood was invited. So they basically tell her, you're not really wanted at the Halloween party. We're down to fuck. You're sweet, but I'm what he wants. And so, Lauren is now upset that she's obviously not invited to this party. But again, it doesn't really come up, and Lauren doesn't seem like the one who's going to be like constantly crying and making a big scene out of this. So she pretty much stays pretty low key about everything going on with this Halloween party. But again, this is when the texts start, and she's starting to wonder, like, who is this? The texter is kind of positioning themselves as another girl who is trying to date Owen. These texts are fucking crazy. And I think that's one of the things that really made this documentary pop off on Netflix is because the nature of these text messages are so harsh. As I mentioned, they were excessive, sometimes exceeding 60 a day. And they were coming from all hours of the day and night. So the kids were at school, the kids were trying to sleep, and they're receiving these insanely aggressive messages. So they would block the number, and then very soon after they'd get new texts from a new number harassing them about something else. So it was pretty consistent, and the families were also very confused and didn't really know how to handle this. But let's kind of go through some of the texts. I cherry picked some of my favorites. Some of them were making fun of Lauren's looks. They said, "You're the ugliest person I've ever seen. Owen wants me and he wants to touch my hair." Like, okay. He'll be with me while your ugly ass is alone. And if I'm laughing at this, it's simply because I know who wrote them, and it's like damaging my brain to know someone had the capacity to do this. But let's keep going. We want to take Low down. She's a fucking waste. Low, bro, Low, stop it. And they kept calling her Low, which was her nickname, which is again another kind of way that this texter was kind of implying that they're in the friend group and that they know them pretty intimately. They said, "You dress like a fucking slut. What are you trying to get it?" They said, "Don't wear leggings. No one wants to see your anorexic flat ass." They would call her an anorexic toddler. They would call her Little Tyke's body. They'd make fun of her outfits that she would wear to school. One message included a homecoming photo of Lauren with a vomiting emoji pasted over her head and the word skank and hoe plastered red on her body. These are serious fighting words. It has taken a turn from just being he doesn't want you into now, calling you a whore, calling you a slut, calling you an anorexic flat ass, like all of these fucked up things. And then it gets into kind of more of her sports focused drama. So when the girls' basketball season was gearing up that fall, 3 freshman girls ended up making it to the varsity team, and Lauren ended up staying on JV, which did happen to me when I played field hockey. And I did quit the team after I didn't make it to varsity, and all my friends did. Because I'm a quitter. Always have been. Likely always will be. So the cyberbully ended up making fun of her for that, saying, "You suck at basketball. He ain't dating no suck ass, anorexic, not good enough JV girl." So again, these are very pointed, targeted attacks on this poor girl. After basketball games, they would text her, "You should quit, get hurt, and be done." The bully even gloated sometimes about scoring more than her. At one point, the bully then ended up gloating in a text message saying that they scored 12 points in the game. So that was also a nice little tip off for the authorities to wonder, well, who played in that game and who scored 12 points? So at this point, Kendra, Sweet Lauren's mother, actually ran the varsity scoreboard and was able to get the game's records and found out that a girl named Chloe Wilson, the daughter of the woman Tammy, who has the annual Halloween party, ended up scoring 12 points. So that's kind of when fingers began pointing at this girl, Chloe, but we're going to get deeper into her later in the episode. But things get darker and darker in these text messages. Things get incredibly sexual. Girls be spending the night because real bitches cream. He wants nothing to do with you. He thinks you're annoying and an ugly bitch and wishes you would leave him the fuck alone. Why do you think he's on his phone all the time texting me? You didn't get invited to sleep with him. I did. I'm spending my night with him. I'm sharing my bed with him, not you. Texts even were sent to Owen saying Lauren doesn't like you because she won't give you blowjobs. Um, to Lauren, text said, "My fucking tits in his face." Owen and I down to Owen and I down to suck finger fuck. His dick and fingers in my pussy and mouth. He wants sex. No dude ever fucking that pussy, you nasty slut. And then last but not least, fucking make him horny, make him cream. I'm speechless. When I heard the word cream in all of these text messages, I felt like I need to take a shower. I'm like, this is disgusting. The person who's writing this is clearly an adult because kids might not know some of these phrases. Again, they're in middle school, so I'm not saying that they're like 7 years old and they don't know these things, but they're still very young at 12, 13 years old. And this is incredibly vulgar. Like, the use of the word cream makes me physically ill. Like, I feel like I'm gonna have to, yeah, take a shower after this recording because I've seen too much, I've said too much. So the sexual shit got weird, but then things got incredibly dark when the cyberbully was then literally encouraging Lauren to take her own life. And in a group thread with the texter, Lauren and Owen, they encouraged Owen to help take Lauren down and told her that Owen said that his life would be so much better if you were dead and that nobody cares if you were gone. They told Lauren to kill yourself now, bitch. They said dead, bang, bang, suicide to her. They said finish yourself or we will, bang. Or we will, bang. There were a few rare moments of remorse with this cyberbully, and it really only came out when suicide was being encouraged, which, like, oh, I'm so glad the cyberbully has a heart. Wow, thank you so much. So that evening when the cyberbully suggested that Owen said Lauren should take her life and, his life would be better off if she were dead, about a half hour later, they took it back and said, sorry, I shouldn't say dead, that was too far. And then just 6 months later, they send an all caps text message saying, kill yourself now, bitch. So things have escalated over time. The bullying became relentless, and now there are threats for her life. This is terrifying. And I can only imagine being, their parents, the parents of these kids who are so confused about what the hell is going on. So after about 13 months of the text messages picking back up, Owen ends up dumping Lauren. He calls her and asks to break up. He said he was sick of fighting and the texting messed with his trust. And, Lauren remembers asking if they could just take a break. And he basically was like, no, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And Owen kind of thought that this breakup was somewhat tactical in the sense that hopefully this would satisfy the cyberbully and that they would be left alone because that's ultimately what they wanted, right? That's what they kept encouraging Lauren to do, to leave him and encouraging him to go with a girl who will cream with him. Am I going to go to prison? Like, I feel like I have to stop. Okay, I promise. Actually, no, there's like a few more cream references later in the episode. I'm like, I know what's coming in this episode. And I walked into it. I'm talking about children. I cannot get deep into this. Okay. Moving on, Megan. Focus. Refocus. Yikes. So they break up. It's very sad. A few days after the breakup, the cyberbully started declaring victory, saying to Lauren, maybe you shouldn't have picked cross country over him. You proved he just isn't important to you. We were there, though. You didn't get with him in bed. You didn't sneak out with him. You fucking dress awful. Ain't no guy want that. Which, like, possibly, but that's, again, not an excuse to cyberbully people. Kendra herself, Lauren's mother, mentioned that she took the breakup pretty badly, and she very much would ask Jill, Owen's mom, if she thought the kids would be getting back together, if she thought the breakup was just because the bully, like if they have a chance of like rekindling. And Jill was like, I don't know. Like, It's my son's choice. Like, I'm not going to tell him he needs to be with Lauren, and this kid's already gone through enough this year. If he doesn't want to date you, he doesn't want to date you. And it's sad because middle school is such an experimental time for young people, and it's, still somewhat low stakes when it comes to your friendships or your relationships. And that time of supervised relationships and cell phone use is kind of supposed to prepare these kids for adulthood and college when they aren't being supervised. So the fact that these kids had such an unsafe experience on their phones while they're dating is so damaging. And I mean, there's a million other things we'll get to that's like incredibly damaging in this episode. So don't you wait, stay tuned. But Owen ended up getting a new girlfriend in a neighboring town, and he starts dating this girl. He was back to being happy Owen again, and that girl's mom started ending up getting texts from the unknown number saying, back off because I'm Owen's. And now the harassment started going towards his new girlfriend. Thankfully, it seemed like it let up and it didn't get too far. But again, it's showing that there is a motive around Owen and that Owen is very much the center of this. Lauren was, of course, dealing with a ton of the harassment, but the cyberbully reaching out to Owen's new girlfriend's mother shows that there is an obsession with Owen involved, and this cyberbully doesn't want Owen to really move on with another girl, and seemingly also doesn't want Owen to be with Lauren. So there's something weird here going on with an obsession around Owen. So who the hell is doing this? The parents and the kids are, of course, saying that it has to be someone that we know. We know that as for a fact. And as I mentioned, fingers start pointing at Chloe Wilson, who's a fellow classmate of theirs. And again, they've all known each other since they were kids because their school is so small, as is the community. And Chloe and Owen kind of crushed on one another. Supposedly, Chloe and Lauren never really got along with one another. And so that's why people were starting to question her. I liked at one point during the documentary, Owen said, Chloe wasn't a nice person by any means. She was not a bully, but she was not a nice person. And I feel like people could have said that about me. No surprise. She had a big personality. She had a big friend group. She was a natural born leader. She was also a very good athlete. She was one of the girls who did make it to the varsity basketball team. So again, all the fingers were kind of pointing towards Chloe. Other than the scoring 12 points in the basketball game, there were also a few other things that pointed towards Chloe. One was Chloe often said bruh, B-R-U-H, and so did the texter. And it's interesting as you follow the trajectory of the text messages. The earlier texts were complete sentences with proper capitalization and proper punctuation. You didn't get invited to sleep with him, comma, I did, period. And that's just not how children text. And later, as the text started getting crazier, the text started getting looser, less punctuation, less capitalization. And they were using phrases like bruh, sorry, SRY, sorry, not sorry, WTF, right now, RN. So you can kind of see that the cyberbully was kind of morphing from what seemed like an adult into being a more colloquial child's vocabulary. Chloe's dad also happened to be the police sergeant, and the texter would mention that they had cops to defend them and be on their side. But because Chloe's dad was a police officer, people also kind of assumed that Chloe could use her dad's police force skills to help her delete possible evidence. She was obviously completely confident in her innocence. She's like, I didn't do this. Why would I do this? And at one point, she gave Owen her phone for the entire day so that he could see that she wasn't sending the text messages. So he was receiving the text messages from the cyberbully while she didn't have a phone. So Chloe also tried to prove her innocence by giving her dad her phone, and they had, the police force download all of the contents on her phone, and it came up completely clean with no signs of cyber abuse, weird text messages, pictures, anything. And another kind of weird way of this cyberbully kind of framing Chloe in a way was that the cyberbully actually mentioned Chloe, but spoke in the first person, as in my phone got dumped, as in like my all the contents of my phone got dumped for them to look at. So it kind of seemed like they were positioning themselves to be Chloe, and Chloe's like, "Hey, it wasn't me. Like, why would I do this? I don't care that much. I might be like a little bitch, but like I'm not like a psycho fucking cyber bullier for like close to 22 months. What the fuck?" Lauren's mom, Kendra, also complained that Lauren's Snapchat had been hacked. She claimed that the login for the hacked Snapchat came from Broomfield Township, which is where the Wilsons live. And on one weekend, texts actually came from the 906 area code, which is Michigan's Upper Peninsula area, where Chloe was snowmobiling with her family. Again, more things that kind of point towards Chloe being the perpetrator, but again, nobody's able to find any concrete information. There was also several complaints about Chloe onto OK to Say, which is a state's tip line for potential threats to students. One was while they were in middle school about Chloe yelling at a teammate on the court, as well as another that year because I guess Owen had helped her during a computer class, and I guess somebody didn't like that. So, of course, Chloe gets brought in for questioning. They're confused. They want to know what's up with Chloe and her involvement. And the sheriff actually ends up showing Chloe and her parents messages from the bully that Kendra had shared with him. So some of the texts included screenshots of Snapchat DMs between Lauren and someone named Chloe. But Chloe said she had never sent those. And she was implying that somebody had created a ghost Snapchat account to impersonate her and write those messages to Lauren. She quickly created a ghost account to prove to her parents and prove to the sheriff that it's incredibly easy to do this. And it's again another way that somebody is trying to frame her. And in those DMs, Chloe actually recognized her words, although they were portions of her words that she had used in various chats with Owen that she ended up actually screen recording and sending to Lauren to prove that they weren't flirting. So, it's interesting that these screenshots are now being added to fake Snapchat DM exchanges coming from Kendra's box of proof. So, again, it's seeming like this is a bit of a setup and that somebody's really out to get Chloe. It very much seems like the cyberbully is trying to position Chloe as the perpetrator. So Jill, Owen's mom, ends up texting Chloe, pretending to be her son to test her reaction. She ends up messaging Chloe, "If it's you, be honest." And Chloe immediately FaceTimes Owen, being like, "What the fuck? It's not me. You should know this by now." And at this point, Owen was starting to really get upset with his entire situation. One, texts are completely out of hand. And also, he's feeling like his mom is getting too invested and going behind his back and reaching out to Chloe and his friends to try to find information. And he's just over all of it. He's completely overwhelmed by it, and it makes sense. Lauren would also try to confront Chloe by text, asking her if she had problems with her, like, "You could just say it to my face." But because the school was so small, Lauren actually still sat with Chloe and the other girls at lunch. The other ladies said that she was completely silent. She was kind of like a ghost friend. And she sometimes would talk, but she was always whispering in a very timid tone. And even during like roll calls, she would, quietly say, "Here." At that point, she was pretty much a shell of herself. It's like so sad. These are just like sweet middle school kids. I hate this. Lauren would even go to her parents, especially her dad, and talk about how she felt like she didn't have any friends while this was going on. And, the one person that she did have was her mom. Her classmates would say that Lauren would always be texting during class and that she was always telling her friends that she was texting with her mom. And even at basketball tournaments where all the kids were hanging out with one another, Lauren always chose to sit with her mom as well. And even Chloe's dad and mom, who were very passionate in the documentary, and there's a suspect thing that they do towards the end. So be sure to literally tune into the last fourth line of this episode because it's very interesting what Chloe's parents actually do. It's classless, honestly, but besides the point. Chloe's dad said, if Chloe's been doing this, then we've severely missed something as parents. She's in school, she's playing sports, she's doing her homework, she's showering, and she's going to bed. Like, where and when would she have done this? What's in it for her? What is her motive? It just seemed like people were trying to clearly frame Chloe. But I mean, who would do that and what is their motive? So let's keep going, people. At this point, the school is heavily involved. The principal, Dan Boyer, has been involved in cyberbullying cases in the past, but he had never seen any kind of case like this that had this aggressive volume of messages. The school kind of thought that Lauren possibly could be sending this to herself for attention, but they quickly kind of trailed away from that and were kind of trying to find different ways of utilizing the technology that the school had by having Lauren alert the school when she would get a new text, and then the school would go through the cameras to see who was on their phone during those moments when she was getting those texts. But of course, that wasn't incredibly fruitful. They were also trying to find a mole. They were having Lauren say certain things to certain people to see if it would then be brought up in the text messages, which would point to a certain friend or a certain basketball player on her team who they could pinpoint as the cyberbully. Again, nothing came from that. They had been reviewing the footage from the school, and while they were reviewing the footage from the gym, one thing that did pique Dan's interest was the fact that Kendra, who was the coach of the basketball team, oftentimes had her head down on her phone, and she always had two phones with her as well. She said one was for work and one was for personal. Again, because people were thinking that Chloe was the perp, the parents of Owen and Lauren asked the principal if they were able to address the girls' basketball team, mainly Chloe, to see if they could try to get to the girls and express their frustration, and hopefully that would then have the possible perpetrator stop. But the principal said, I'm not doing that. We're not going to, have any type of emotional parents causing a scene, accusing children of cyberbullying. Like, it was just too much. The parents actually ended up trying to take things into their own hands in other ways as well. Both sets of parents tried to do whatever they could to stop this. Owen's parents would take his phone away in the evenings, but it was hard because Owen needed to have his phone to keep in touch with sports coaches, his travel league teammates at other schools. He also needed access to Google Classroom, and it's just like a lifeline for a normal teenager. So it's hard to say, like, why don't you just take your phone away from your kid? It's like, well, it's not that easy. And as I mentioned, they can't keep blocking these numbers because the person would just get a new burner account. And if they got a new phone number, they knew that the cyberbully would be able to find their phone number again. So there were lots of dead ends, and everybody was just getting very frustrated and confused and upset. And of course, like, the mental health of these children were starting to suffer. So on certain nights when things were really bad, Jill would definitely text Kendra and tell her to go check on Lauren. And other nights, the two moms would just be on the phone with one another, strategizing about, what they're trying to figure out through the text messages. And the two of them actually got closer throughout this entire process. And the sheriff's department actually had asked Jill and Kendra, what their child's mental state is, and is it to an extent where, the parents think that the child might hurt themselves. And, Jill said, I've kind of been watching my son wither away. He's talking back at home. He's looking miserable. He's, pulling from, this anger within him on the basketball court. She wasn't recognizing her son, but she didn't think that he was at the point where he would have hurt himself. And, Owen also kind of felt like the cyberbully was a girl, and the cyberbully would sometimes call him like a pussy bitch. And Jill felt that the shame that he was feeling was even more amplified because it seemed like he was being picked on by this girl. And, when you're young and you have all of these ego issues, that was even more, damaging. She mentioned he had always been super happy-go-lucky and a great kid, and that now he would, be begging to stay home from school, and he was suffering from severe anxiety. When the sheriff got to Kendra and asked her about how Lauren is doing and if she has the potential to possibly hurt herself, Kendra did say yes, and she said, "We're afraid that Lauren could hurt herself." And mind you, this cyberbully is encouraging her to kill herself, telling her she's anorexic, telling her she's ugly, telling her all the reasons why her boyfriend doesn't like her. There's a million things that would affect this poor girl. At one point, Lauren's friends, these twin girls, ended up seeing Lauren cry on the bus, and even the girls said, every time that they would see Kendra's name on their phone, they were hoping and praying that that wasn't the call or the text that was saying that Lauren had tried to hurt herself. So even the other girls in Lauren's life knew that things were getting very, very bad and to a very dark place. So at this point, law enforcement's very much involved, and they're trying to come up with more plans and more ways of figuring out who the perpetrator is. So at first, the investigation was led by Isabella County Sheriff Mike Main, and they were kind of initially focusing on Lauren and Owen's classmates and friends, casting suspicions throughout the school, and ultimately fracturing friendships and relationships as they were, digging into people, i.e., Chloe. They were taking footage that they were capturing at the school, but they were coming up with nothing. So they ended up having to reach out to Bradley Peter, who was a police officer in nearby Bay City, who stepped in as a liaison to the FBI to try and crack this case. We love Bradley Peter here on I Know You Didn't Ask because he does crack the case. So in April of 2022, he gets on the case and he basically dug through about 720 pages of messages between Owen and Lauren's cell phones from the cyber bully. So he was completely appalled by the content, not just the sheer volume of them, but the graphic nature of so many of the disgusting, creamy text messages. He wasn't able to find any geo files associated with the messages or the pictures. So he was also struggling a little bit with the source material that he had. He knew it was someone from the school, but he was just looking for that smoking gun. And there was one picture. It was a picture that was sent from the cyberbully to Lauren, and the photo had Owen at his family's Christmas. And you could see a sweatshirt and his phone case, and you could tell he was with his family. So the cyberbully had to have been at this Christmas event to have this photo. Just their families were there. And so who could it have been? And fingers started pointing at Owen's cousin Adriana, who's also their age. Maybe she was younger, I don't remember. She's another kind of young, sweet, nerdy girl. And they were now saying that it's possibly her. But again, what would her motive be? It's her cousin Owen. And I guess there had been some beef between Adriana and Chloe. I guess Chloe threw a carrot at her. Again, we're talking like middle school kids and their drama. But supposedly Chloe was thinking that it could be Adriana trying to kind of set her up for, Carrot Gate. They drag Adriana in, and she ends up receiving texts from the cyberbully herself as well, saying, "Owen needs your help. We need to get Lo away from him. Tell his parents Lo a bitch." Again, Adriana's like, "Why do you have to include me? Like, keep me out of this fucking mess." So these burner phone apps hold on to new subscriber records for about 2 weeks. So around mid-April, Jill ends up sending Brad Peters 4 new numbers. And one of the numbers ends up connecting to a Verizon IP address out of the Ann Arbor and Detroit areas, and another to a server for the Beale schools. So we're getting closer, people. Peter got word from Verizon about the IP addresses that the bully's number had connected to over that Easter weekend from Ann Arbor and Detroit. Peter opened Pandora's box and was able to find hundreds of phone numbers that had connected to those IP addresses over the next 2 days. And as he was digging through all of the files, he was searching for all the phone numbers that he had of people who were related to the case, including friends, coaches, everyone, and he even checked the parents' phone number, and one number and only one number appeared. And that one phone number belonged to Lauren's mom herself, Kendra Lakari. So that buck-tooth, donkey-looking ass bitch was the perpetrator and the cyberbully. I've been nice this whole fucking time. And now the tone of this episode is going to gravely change. She has some fucking explaining to do. So it's interesting because there had been some people tipping off the principal and the cops that Kendra could possibly have been the perpetrator, but they didn't want to think this loving mother who was very present at the school and always there for Lauren and very emotional about this entire thing would have the capacity, free time, and sick mind to do something like this to her own daughter. One of the secretaries at the school ended up actually going through some of the text messages and said, "This is an adult and I wouldn't put it past Kendra." So we had her kind of coming in with some suspicions. That secretary also said, "I always thought she was a little obsessive with her child. My gut told me that this isn't one of our kids." Chloe's dad, the sheriff, also wrote in text that he thinks that Kendra is doing it because she's not a truthful person. Craig also texted the sheriff saying, "I don't know if you know Kendra or not, but you really need to be cautious. There's a pretty good part of me that thinks she may very well be doing this." And then Sheriff Maine obviously gets that text from Craig, who's Chloe's father, who's also in the police force, so he probably has a pretty good inkling for stuff like this. Sheriff Maine ends up going to Jill and Dave McKinney and asks them, "Do you think this could be Kendra?" And they said, absolutely not. So a lot of signs were pointing to Kendra, but people just didn't think that a mother could have the capacity to do something like this. But Kendra was also inserting herself into the investigation with both the sheriff as well as like the FBI who came in to ultimately solve the crime. She was very much trying to interject herself into the investigation, saying, "What's the latest? Where are you? What are the updates?" Looking for all this information and trying to get updates, basically flagging some suspicion to the investigators that they were like, "Well, why do you care so much? We're doing the best we can. We have all of our source material. We're figuring it out. Relax. Like, we're on it. You don't need to be up our ass so much." So fast forward a little bit, and Sheriff Maine ends up receiving a search warrant to go to the Lacari's house and to throw the fuck down and see what's up. So this is after about 22 months of all of the cyberbullying happening. So that's just shy of 2 years of torturing your own daughter. So now in the documentary, we see the entire conversation from the perspective of the police's body cam, and it is completely bone chilling. So we see Mike Maine turn to the gravel driveway of their ranch home, and this was Sean's mother's place. We'll get into some shady lies very soon about their living situations. And as the sheriff drives up, Kendra was out front hauling trash, and they step out of the car and they tell her they're there to seize her devices, and that's what their warrant was there for. So the sheriff hands Kendra the warrant, saying that she's being investigated as the cyberbully. When she denied it, the sheriff told her, "Just be honest, your number showed up each time a text was sent." And she again still wasn't really giving them much, but she wasn't aggressive. She wasn't hysterical. They had asked her if she was infatuated with Owen, and Kendra said no, it was nothing like that. The sheriff then demands that she explains, and something kind of shifted in her. And Kendra immediately said, "Well, the first texts weren't from me." So right then and there, she just kind of blurts out an admission of guilt that the, I guess, more recent texts are from her, but she's claiming that the initial text did not come from her. However, law enforcement has said they believe she is behind all of the messages, including the first ones. She said she fed off from the first text and then she began to send them on her own. And she implied that the first set of text messages that were sent to her were sent from a group of kids who were trying to come between Lauren and Owen and their relationship. And again, no one's believing the bullshit. And the detective and Sheriff Mike Maine asks, "Well, why did you continue doing this for 22 months?" And she said, "I was under a lot of stress and financial issues." She basically said, like, "We're broke. I lost my job. So instead of, I don't know, like getting a fucking job, I decided to relentlessly bully my daughter and her boyfriend, telling her she's anorexic, she's a creamy girl, she sucks at sports, and that she should kill herself." Imagine you just got a job like the rest of the fucking world when you need money. It's fucking insane. So at this point, Lauren is clearly outside. She must have been swimming or something. I mean, they live on a gorgeous lake. This is Sean's mother's house, but when they go outside and see like the backyard, like they're on a beautiful lakefront property. And so Lauren comes in and she's wearing a towel, and the officer needs to break the hard news to her to reveal that her mom was actually the woman behind the messages. And as a kid, it's just traumatizing to be near the cops in general, let alone having them in your house, let alone knowing that you've been bullied for the last 2 years and that they might have some new information. And they ultimately tell Lauren that her mom has been, in fact, sending those text messages. And again, Lauren was very cool, calm, and collected. She didn't really seem too phased. And it kind of gave me this feeling like she might have had her own suspicions about her mom, because she did not really go too crazy in this entire conversation with the cops. Of course, she's scared of all the things, and there's probably 1,000 things going on in her head, and she's like stunned into silence because of, her situation. But she was very low key about it all. And it's interesting because the director of the documentary said, quote, "The way that Kendra and Lauren are interacting is really fascinating to watch. You don't see Lauren sort of break down with any real emotion until Sean is home. She can see the fracture happening in her family. And that is just so heartbreaking to me. That's when you see Lauren understand that her family is never going to be the same again." And so while we're in this house, you also see a table behind them that just has like tons and tons of bottles of booze. It was out of control. Like, if Kendra didn't ruin her daughter's social life, she very much would have been the mom who's like, "Girls, boys, you guys can drink here, but I'm gonna have to take your keys because I'm a cool mom. Like, you could drink, don't worry, I won't tell your moms, but just don't get in the car, please." So Lauren ends up calling her dad, and the sheriff gets on the phone and basically says, "Hey, you need to come home right now." And so he does. But before that, they're kind of just talking with the sheriff, and we see Lauren and Kendra like embracing. They're touching each other the whole time. And Kendra says, once this is out there, like, I don't know how she's going to go to school. It's like, bitch, this is on you. You should have thought of that 22 months ago, you sicko. Like, she said, "I really don't want people to find out." And it's like, well, yeah, people are going to find out. What are you thinking? And so at this point, Sean gets home. They break the news to Sean, and he's completely confused. And it seems like just a few months earlier, the McKinneys were kind of struck by the fact that Sean seemed to know very little about the cyberbullying. So it kind of seemed to be Kendra and Lauren's dirty little secret between the two of them that they didn't really always bring into the dad's ether. And so Sean gets home, and the foundation of his relationship is just crumbling right in front of us. And basically, again, like I said, he looks completely broken. And Sean is immediately forthright with the cops, basically saying, no, she doesn't have 2 phones, she has 3 phones. And that third phone ended up being nestled in the stack of wood outside Kendra had stashed right as she saw the sheriff driving up the property. I mean, 3 phones and no job, that is suspect. But as that is happening, Sean ends up finding out that Kendra hasn't been working, that all of her jobs have been bullshit. So the sheriff ends up telling him, she was let go from Ferris and she had lost both of her jobs. And Sean's like, "Wait, you're telling me you haven't had a job in a year? How are we paying our bills? This is fucking crazy." It's like, bro, how is she going to work? She's cyberbullying full time. Come on. Like, what don't you get about that? So throughout the year, Kendra maintained that she had been working from home, faking phone calls when Sean was around. And according to a family member, whenever anybody would ask about anything financial, Kendra would just change the subject immediately to the cyberbullying. And Kendra was also considered the breadwinner of this family. And she had been lying to her husband and daughter how she was spending her days. People even saw her at one point parked outside one of the Catholic churches, half a block away from school. And Kendra was just sitting in the parking lot texting on her phone. And the next day, Kendra brought up to Jill and Dave McKinney, in an unprompted way, "Oh, I'm sure Dave saw me and he must have thought it was odd that I was sitting in this parking lot. I drove to the school, I drove to get gas, and then I got a coffee, but then I spilled the coffee and da da da." So she's just like making a lie, and Jill obviously snipped out her lie. But She was clearly bringing this up as kind of like an alibi, just in case it ever came up in front of Sean about why she's sitting in a parking lot of a church when she should be at work. Her various jobs ended up putting her on performance improvement plans, PIP plans, they call them, and they cited excessive time on non working texting and calls. And then another company that she worked for said that she was also being fired for her performance. And she had told her husband, Sean, that this new job at Ferris that she had came with a massive salary bump. However, bill collectors were filing lawsuits with them for unpaid utility and insurance bills. So shit is crumbling all around them. As I mentioned, they were living in Sean's parents' home at the time of the arrest, and it seemed like they had been evicted from multiple houses. One of her houses supposedly was struck by lightning, and then they made a false insurance claim. So, back right when Lauren and Owen started dating, the Lucaris moved into a log cabin after entering into a land contract, which is a way for people with bad credit to buy homes, in which the buyer pays installments directly to the owner. But in April of 2022, just a few months later, the court received a request from the Lucaris to delay getting evicted from their cabin. The letter to the courts basically said, "We're unemployed. We don't have anywhere else to go. We're terrified of being homeless with our daughter." The courts didn't care. They evicted them a month later. Kendra told the family that the house's foundation had cracked and that's why they had to move out while it was lifted up for repairs. So she was just lying up and down about every single thing. And Sean wasn't totally in the dark. He had mentioned to some of his friends at the body shop that they had missed some house payments because someone in New Mexico had stolen their identity, or another time that his pickup truck had been repossessed because of a scammer in Saginaw. So Kendra was always finding ways to lie. There was even a moment when one of her checks bounced for her portion of a spring break condo. She said she was hacked and that's why it bounced, of course. So Sean had to know a little bit that shit was getting a little shady. They were constantly moving, constantly having issues, and nobody has such bad luck, right? Especially with two people who are working good jobs, right? What's the confusion? And he also never said, "Can I see the books?" And clearly they didn't have the type of relationship where he felt like he needed to ask his wife for that kind of information. So, of course, Sean is basically like, "Get the fuck out of the house." And Sean's like, "You need to call your parents right now. You need to call your parents and have them get you." And Kendra is saying, "I need to be with Lauren. I need to stay with Lauren." And it's like, honey, are you kidding? That is absolutely not happening. So why did she do it? Why would a mother subject their child to this type of emotional, physical, and sexual, let's be real, abuse? And I think a weird, creepy part of this was an obsession that she had with Owen. And why is she so obsessed with this young kid? Owen's mom even said, "I think she became obsessed with Owen, but I think that there was some level of relationship that she wanted to have with Owen that is obviously not acceptable at her age." So she was, encouraging Lauren to be with him, even so buying her a shirt that I saw in one of the moments in the documentary that said, "I've got dibs on the quarterback." Like, she's 12 years old and no kid is buying themselves that cheesy, lame shirt. But it was clear that Kendra was trying to insert herself into Lauren's relationship with Owen, Owen's relationship with his other girlfriend, as well as just being kind of ever present in Owen's life. As we know, ball is life when it comes to these kids. And in 8th grade, Kendra signed up to coach Owen's track team. And he even said that he was at one point thinking of Kendra like a second mom because she was always around. She was always a spectator at Owen's various games, and she would even drive Lauren sometimes 3 hours all the way across Michigan to watch some of his games. And at one point, Kendra even suggested turning one of Owen's tournaments down in Florida into a Licari family vacation, and Jill had to come in and say, "No, like, you guys can't come. You're not invited. This is weird. We're overstepping our boundaries." Kendra also kind of glamorized their relationship and would talk with Jill about how, the kids are going to be together forever. And as I mentioned, Kendra really struggled with their breakup, which is creepy because she's just like the girl's mom, like, fucking relax. But there was even one of Lauren's friends, as I mentioned, she's friends with these twins, who once saw Kendra take Lauren's phone, read her daughter's text with Owen, and then as Lauren, Kendra typed out a reply to Owen saying, "I love you." So these friends are making these weird comments. So that's kind of why I feel like there had to be some way that Lauren was kind of aware of what was going on. And there was one point that these twin friends of hers, who ended up getting back in touch with Lauren after everything went down, and said, Lauren did start considering that her mom could be the bully, but it wasn't until that last month or so before the sheriff turned up that she started having those sneaking suspicions. Jill was also starting to pick up on strange signals from Kendra. Months after they broke up, Kendra started to pry into Owen's other love interests, asking Jill, what Owen and Chloe's status was. And, Jill kind of told her, like, moving forward, we're not talking about who my son is dating. Like, we're only going to talk about finding the cyber bully. And it's sad because, these creepy moms are like fixating on the love lives of their daughters and the boyfriends of their daughters. And it's kind of like, haha, whatever. But like, if the dad was doing this towards a young girl, like, you'd be fucking arrested on the spot. Kendra's interest in Owen and Lauren's relationship seemed a little bit more harmless than incestuous or creepy, because she's just the mom and she's just, happy for her daughter and cares about what's going on in her life. But it's like not the case. And there were even moments at a volleyball game when Lauren was in her freshman year where they weren't sitting with one another. And Lauren started getting compulsive texts from her mom, who was sitting across from them at the gym, saying, sit next to him, next text, answer me, next, come here now, next, I'm pissed, move your ass now, I'm fucking fuming, I'm pissed off, this is fucking ridiculous, answer me now and move your ass. So even just that little, display of text message aggression, you can see that she's encouraging him to sit with him, and then she's saying, actually, no, come to me, I'm fucking pissed off. So she's clearly on an emotional spectrum, where this poor girl probably just like doesn't know what to do. Obviously Kendra is a sick fuck. The lack of empathy she has towards her daughter is devastating, and we see Kendra in the fucking interviews of this documentary. These types of sick people exist, and I want to think of her as a monster, but unfortunately, like, she is human, and some humans just have brains that like behave differently than normal people. And there's a million different reasons why she could have done this, but the way I kind of look at her is in a kind of like victim mentality in a sense. And I think people who struggle to define themselves in their communities or their personal lives will try to tap into identities, whether it is a patient or a victim in their case, or the hero. And, those identities give them something to cling on to, and to, in this case, milk. And it's interesting because, according to her attorneys, Kendra insisted that, again, she didn't send those first text messages, but she saw how receiving those text messages made the people around her rally around her and her family, giving her this new attention. We also saw her friendship with Jill become a friendship, as they would talk on the phone and kiki about all the texts and come up with their schemes to try to find out who did this. This was something for them to bond over. And it seemed like she kind of sought support from really anybody who would listen, and would even be talking about the cyberbullying with people in the community who she barely knew. So this was kind of like her in for getting, conversations going. And I kind of feel like she felt like she was missing out in the community of Beale City that was, generations deep. Her husband came from there and was born and raised in that family, but he was never in the in crowd. He wasn't hanging out with Jill and Dave. He wasn't hanging out with Tammy, Chloe's parents. So it kind of felt like it was important for Kendra to make sure that Lauren was hanging out with the cool people who have generations in Beale City, who are very well known in the town, these kind of OG families. And it felt like Kendra was kind of ostracized from those other adults. But while Lauren was being cyberbullied, those people who at one point ostracized her were then being kind to her, were then being her friend,
then were including her in things. So then it kind of fed the beast a little bit. People are kind of calling this Munchausen's a little bit, which is a mental disorder where patients kind of purposely induce medical problems. And we're using medical problems in this example. The very well-known case of Munchausen's is Yolanda Foster. Just kidding. Was just Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her Blanchard, whose mom told her growing up that she had all these health issues. She couldn't even walk when she actually had little to no health issues in general. So, Gypsy Rose and her mom were receiving well wishes and sympathy, community support, Make-A-Wish Foundation wishes, and, all of this deception around her daughter's fake illness created positive outcomes, and that behavior itself becomes addictive and compulsive. So I kind of feel like that's what was happening with Kendra. She was noticing that the bullying was getting her and her daughter attention, negative or positive attention nonetheless, and that encouraged her to continue on with the texts and continue on with the bullying. And it's interesting because the principal of the school said Cyber Munchausen was likely kind of what was happening here. And he was saying that he felt like a lot of her motive was to keep the kids close to her, which would eliminate threatening relationships. And this started right at 7th grade when girls and boys start pulling away from their parents a little bit more. They lean more towards their friends and girlfriends or boyfriends, and they start seeking out independence, which was something that Kendra couldn't have. She couldn't release that control and power over her daughter. And she very much wanted to be her safe space. So Lauren would be cyberbullied all day on her phone. She'd come home devastated. And who would she come home to? Her loving mother, who would embrace her and help her and lick her wounds and, be able to calm her down. And that desire for, mommy's affection also fueled Kendra. She knew my daughter's going to come home and she's going to still want me. She's going to want me to be her number one. It's fucking sick. The depths that people go to satiate this desire for attention and this desire to be seen. It is so sad. And Kendra's cousin actually comes in the documentary and she's talking about how Kendra's always wanted to be seen and heard, and she was the life of the party. They would go on cruises and she'd be the one on stage dancing her ass off. And the cousin even said, if Kendra was in the room while the cousin was doing her interview right now, she'd be in the corner trying to get everybody's attention, dancing and making a fool of herself so everybody looked at her and not the, cousin in the middle of her interview. So it seemed like Kendra was very much seeking that attention in many parts of her life. And, the fact that it got to the point where she was encouraging her daughter to kill herself is psychotic and disgusting. And as I mentioned earlier, these kind of tropes that you can fall into, patient, victim, hero. Her daughter was the victim of all of these attacks, while Kendra is the hero trying to stand up and going to the sheriff and trying to figure this out. Like, you kind of fall into these categories that you can't get out of. Kendra begins talking about how her trauma led her to this. She wasn't eating. She was too skinny. She said, I'm a headline. I'm a villain, but that's because they don't know my full story. She basically said when she was 17 years old, she was raped and she was scared for her daughter to go through that with a guy possibly. So she wanted to do everything in her power to control the outcome of her daughter's life. But unfortunately, that's just not how life goes. However, I do know a lot of times when people have been sexually assaulted at a young age, they then struggle when they see their child at that age, as it brings in a flood of emotions and flashbacks, honestly. And, you're looking at your beautiful child through the lens of their innocent life, and you see what happened to you at that time, and you can kind of project your experiences onto your child, and you see the innocence that was taken away from you at that moment during that assault. But in her attempt to protect her child from anything happening at the hands of a boy, partner, whatever, she actually took things way too fucking far in the other direction, and ultimately did more damage than what Owen or probably any other guy could have ever done to her. So for her to say that, her sexual assault was the motive is fucking sickening, because she in turn then sexually assaulted her daughter and his boyfriend as minors, because maybe those kids weren't thinking about blowjobs or sex or creaming, and that is the last time I'm saying creaming, but like, they weren't thinking about things like this. You put this into their brain, you put this into the ether. So this woman is so fucking sick and twisted. She, of course, agrees to be in a huge expose on in New York Magazine, and the director of the documentary said, Kendra's participation in the documentary was very last minute. It was a very long process of getting her to feel comfortable and be willing to do it. And to be honest with you, again, I think her agreeing to be in this documentary and agreeing to be in this article was just another desire to be seen and heard. At this point, it's going to be in a negative light. Everybody in her community has shunned her, but maybe let's amplify it for, all the Netflix viewers and New York Magazine readers to now also be fully aware of what's going on. But, you're already in a shit place, so why not have more people be aware of your fucked up story? It's, again, fueling this beast of wanting attention, and that is so fucking sick. So in December of 2022, Kendra Licari was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and using a computer to commit a crime. She pled guilty to 2 counts of stalking a minor and was sentenced to 19 months in prison. She was ultimately released on August 8th, 2024. When Kendra was fully arrested, it did happen in the middle of a fucking school day, and Lauren was in school, which is terribly traumatizing. People saw her loading her items into her backpack from her locker, and they didn't see her again. She ended up finishing her sophomore year on an online school all by herself, because, of course, the aftermath of something like this is, not for the weak. And I don't blame the girl for needing to take some time and getting, out of the conversation in the school. At her sentencing, Kendra read from a typed page. Her voice was cracking with sobs, saying, "I'm sorry for my behavior to Owen McKinney and his family. I'm sorry for my behavior to Chloe Wilson and her family. I'm so sorry to my daughter Lauren and my husband Sean." Kendra continued that she had now learned through months of counseling that she had mental illness. Oh, it took counseling to fucking realize that, you sick bitch. She mentioned she had depression, anxiety, and suppressed childhood trauma, including sexual abuse, and that she was unaware that she was in a crisis for many years. Fuck you. I don't believe a goddamn word you say. But of course, Lauren, as a sweet young girl, again, very impressionable and shy and sweet. And that's like the only word I could describe. She's so sweet, and like, it's just terrible that this happened to her. But, she was very torn about how to feel about her mom after all this happened. And children forgive so much easier than adults because they don't have the ability to, maybe see the sick motives of people, and they want to trust that their mom, who is supposed to care and love for them the most out of anybody in this world, would never do something to intentionally harm them, let alone do it for 22 months straight. She said, "I know my dad is angry and will never forgive her, but I want to put aside what happened and have a relationship that I want with her. They were so close, but they were forced to have no contact." Lauren wanted to talk to her mom so badly that she wrote letters to the judge to get in contact with her mom again, and ended up being able to email her on Monday and Wednesdays, as well as be able to talk to her on the phone on those days. And in the documentary, they show some examples of the emails going back and forth between the two of them. And there were things that I, again, see that through this, manipulative relationship. Kendra said to her, "Curly monkey head, I'm mad at you. You made me sad. You didn't say I love you back or something." Sorry, my notes are all fucked. "JK, I forgive you heart." And again, like, you're seeing, like, all right, well, bitch, you're in fucking prison. Like, leave your daughter alone. It's okay if she forgot to say I love you at the end of a call. Fuck you. Lauren said, "I really think I need her in my life. I want to see my mom when the time is right. It will be a relief to see her." She's clearly been lied to and manipulated throughout her entire life by her mom and will need help to put major boundaries and need to develop, her own identity at her own pace. But, Kendra will likely not change and will never be a positive influence nor an appropriate mother figure to this poor girl. So, like, the relationship is done, it's damaged, it is unfortunately never going to be normal. And so, where are these people now? As it's been over a year or so since she's been out of prison, Kendra is living her life with her family near Detroit. She's reportedly even allowed less contact with her daughter now that she was in prison. Her current Instagram bio is keeping my heart wild and free. Maybe don't be too wild or too free. Let's tone it down a little bit, Kendra. Sean, of course, divorced Kendra and has received full custody of Lauren. Sean and Lauren ended up getting closer after all of this, and it's good because it did seem like he was a calming, kind of normal presence for her in her life. Lauren ended up graduating high school and went to college and studied criminology. It's giving Gia Giudice wanting to study law because of her felon parents. It just runs in the family. Lauren and Owen never really spoke after Lauren returned for her junior year. No surprise there. Owen ended up going to college to play baseball, Mazel Tov. While Kendra was still in prison, Lifetime actually released a movie loosely based on what happened in Beale City called Mommy Meanest. Of course, it stars Lisa Rinna, who was the Machiavellian brunette mother harassing her daughter. And I mean, it's kind of amazing that Miss Munchausen herself was in this movie. I didn't have a chance to watch it, and I don't think I'm ever going to because, again, I have other shit to do, shockingly enough. Chloe and her mom, Tammy Wilson, hosted their annual Halloween party. And Tammy, the mother, dressed up as a scarecrow in a prison jumpsuit and had a mask of Kendra's mugshot. She also had 3 phones in her hands that were gnarled and looking nasty. And obviously, it's like not the worst thing that anyone has ever done, especially in this entire story, but I do think it's kind of fucking mean and unnecessary. And like, who mocks, an absolutely tragic story for these young kids? Like, it's fucked up and mean. Lauren talks a little bit about how her mom told her to kill herself. And in those moments in the documentary, it's incredibly painful to watch. And you can see the pain and just confusion and hope that her mom, just got caught up and didn't mean those things. But this sweet girl will forever have trust issues that will take years to heal. Abuse from your parents is so damaging because they are the ones who are supposed to love you and protect you, and it's just even more damaging when it comes from them. Parents are generally not supposed to try to feed their kids to the wolves for their own selfish, sick, attention-seeking desires. In my humble opinion, I think Kendra needs a fucking lobotomy. She deserves absolutely no forgiveness, and she needs to come to terms with the severe damage she has caused her daughter, Owen, Chloe, and basically every fucking person involved in this story. I don't think that will happen, but here's to hoping. So thank you so much for listening to I Know You Didn't Ask. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was really fun to record, even though it's dark as fuck. Nothing like cyberbullying from a mom to really set the tone for the weekend. Be sure to tune in to I Know You Didn't Ask. Next week we have With Love Megan's holiday special recap. Can't wait for that, as well as a banger of an episode on Monday. I haven't really nailed down my topic, so I don't want to get too into it. But thank you so much for listening. Have a great weekend, and let me know what you think of this episode. Bye! New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.